Hey guys, it's Dwayne here. So today we are going to have another special guest on our channel. This is Stephen Hackett from Biblical Studies and Reviews. This is part 1 of 3 where we nerd out on the Greek New Testament and textual criticism. Come join us. Hey YouTube, it's Dwayne here. So I have a special guest with me and I am so excited to be able to bring to you some of the cool stuff that I've seen on Stephen Hackett's channel. Go ahead and wave hi, Stephen.
Hey.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what your channel is about? And give us a quick overview of that.
I'm just kind of an ordinary guy who really loves the Bible. You know, ever since I was a kid, I always liked kind of getting in on the adults' discussions on the Bible, and even from a very young age, I was really interested in biblical languages. I remember asking my grandpa as a little kid, I wonder, if we had the original language, what would it say? And so I've always kind of been interested in those things, and that's sort of intensified for me as I've gotten older. And so I just was kind of digging into things, and finally I decided, I'll get some of these ideas out of my head, and a few people have decided that they're interested in those things. So the goal of my channel really is to help enrich people's Bible studies. And right now I'm focused a lot on New Testament Greek because that's where a lot of my studies have been right now. But I try to kind of broaden that out just to kind of catch a lot of different subjects. I just kind of follow my interests. So I guess my target audience is somebody like me who just really enjoys studying the scriptures.
Nice. So I'm going to provide a link below for you to go and check out his channel. He's got some phenomenal stuff. If you like to dig into the original languages, especially Greek, you've been doing some really awesome stuff with the Septuagint. So maybe we'll get into a little bit of that. But anyway, take a look at the links below. Go to his channel, subscribe, take a look at his awesome content. I wouldn't recommend it if I didn't think it was good. A couple questions, Stephen. You've spent some time learning Greek as a language. Like how does that work for you? Did you go to school to do that, or did you just pick up some books? I noticed you got a really big library there.
Well, I attempted to learn Greek several times. In fact, I started, so my last few years of high school, I homeschooled. We actually bought a self-learning program to try to teach me biblical Greek, and I stumbled on accent marks and breathing marks and gave up at 16. And then I kept trying to get back into it. And then just really a couple of years ago, I got really serious about it. And I found a program online where, it's actually put together by Zondervan, cooperation with Zondervan and Bible Mesh. And I just really, put a lot of effort into trying to bear down and really learn the language. And then after about a year of that, I joined Daryl Burling's program, Mastering Testament Greek, which I found has been just a really incredible resource for me as you learn all the vocabulary for each book before you read it. And it's kind of a guided system of acquiring all the vocabulary of the Greek New Testament and being able to kind of start reading your way through the Greek New Testament. So yeah, that's kind of my journey with Greek. I've studied Hebrew. I started started modern Hebrew, trying to go at it from modern Hebrew into biblical Hebrew, and I just never really acquired any kind of real proficiency in Hebrew. But I'd like to really get into that one day.
Yeah, that's same thing with myself. My wife and I actually, when we were living in the city, we went to one of the synagogues for the purpose of learning Hebrew, and we learned the alphabet and like how to say it and stuff. And they had a really exceptional teacher there. But beyond the course, we actually didn't really do much else with it. I got a couple books on the shelf here. At some point, I will get into them, but keeping up with the Greek for now is enough work as it is.
So yeah, what I would say on that is I think a lot of people, they don't acquire enough of the language to really enjoy the language, and therefore they don't maintain the language. So I think a lot of seminary students will acquire enough Greek that, it gives them a foundation that they could build on. But then they learn just a little bit of, they learn enough Hebrew again that they could kind of build on that foundation if they could. But then they never really bear down on the language hard enough that they can really enjoy reading one or the other, and they end up losing both. So for me, my Greek is getting good enough now that I don't think I'm ever just going to let it go. Not that I'm a great Greek wizard or anything like that, but there's enough now that I profit from it. I enjoy reading it, and it's not just a chore. So I think I'll always probably maintain my Greek, but I wanted to acquire enough Greek before I went into Hebrew so that I didn't lose the Greek that I had, if that kind of makes sense.
Right, right. So, with the Greek that you do have, when you started reading your New Testament in Greek, what were some of the biggest things that stuck out to you? Like, which passages were most eye-opening when you started reading in the Greek?
Yeah, so I think especially those first few weeks of just starting, I started working through First John, and it was just like English is such a kind of a language that's been put together from so many other different sources. It's got some Greek, it's got some Latin, so it's just kind of this mishmash of words, and some of those words, like you might take the word for just and righteous. Those seem like kind of totally different words in English, but in Greek, when you find out, hey, this is from this whole family of words that are related to each other, and just kind of seeing those interconnections between ideas that seem somewhat separate in English, and then kind of discovering that, oh, you know what, that's actually the related to this word, and you see these word groups and families. So I would just say that just those sorts of connections were really eye-opening for me. And then some of the things that people would make a big deal out of and find out, no, actually that's a really common thing. For example, somebody would say this word only appears one time in the Greek New Testament, as if that's a big deal. Like half of the words that appear in the Greek New Testament, almost something like that, only appear.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah, so funny.
Yeah, so of the like 5,000 words in the Greek New Testament, I think, don't quote me on this, but it's somewhere around like 2,000 or something only appear like once or twice. So some of the things that people made a big deal out of, I found out, hey, this is actually fairly commonplace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for me one of the biggest eye openers was the verbal system. So I'm up in Canada, so we don't have a lot of exposure to Spanish, but the verbal system, from what I understand, is supposedly like the Spanish system in its conjugations and such. But the aspect of a verb and the tense of the verb is so much more nuanced than in English, right? So the passage which says ask, seek, and knock, and it'll be given unto you, that's a present tense verb. So the idea there is not that you just kind of ask, but that you continually ask, right? These are the things that you see in the original language that just don't come out quite so well when it's translated into English.
I think one of the ones for me too, saying that's really good. I remember discovering third person imperatives. So for your viewers, most of the time when we give a command, we'll say you jump, and it's in the second person, right? So if I'm telling you to do something, it's directed at you personally. But a lot of times when our English translation will use the word let such and such happen, oftentimes they're translating an actual command, right? Mm-hmm. So when Jesus says, if any man will deny himself, let him take up his cross and follow me.
Right.
That sounds like he's giving him permission to take up his cross. Right?
Yeah, or even a suggestion, right?
A suggestion. Let him take up his cross and follow me. And you find out, no, actually, that's a command. That's something he has to do. The fact that English does not have a third person command, third person imperatives, that was one of the ones that kind of was shocking to me.
Yeah, there's like lots of stuff like that. So for somebody who, doesn't have the ability or the time to get involved and learn a language in its entirety, what would you suggest would be a good way for somebody like that to be able to take advantage of the original language without, necessarily spending 6 years in reading books and courses and all that?
Yeah, so I think some people would probably disagree with me on this. I think there's some really good tools that are out there. A lot of people like to do word studies and things like that, compare places where sometimes our English words will change, right? But it'll be the same Greek word. And those are always interesting. The only thing I would say, though, is I think having studied Greek more now, my appreciation for our English translations have actually deepened rather than gotten less. So sometimes I'll be working through my own translation, and then, my preferred translation is the King James Version. I use the King James Version a lot. And sometimes I'll go back to the King James Version and say, that's exactly right. Like,
Yeah.
they captured it in beautiful English. The reason I say that is because I think there's a tendency, and I think a movement for a lot of people to depend a lot on these tools because there's a lot of tools that are available now.
Yeah, you open up an application like Accordance, and you can see the type of verb it is, whether it's a passive verb or an active verb, or the mood of the verb, whether it's imperative or indicative, right? That's right at the fingertips of the user using Accordance, or Logos or BibleWorks. I think BibleWorks is like out of business now, which is too bad because that's fantastic software. The point with that is some people who teach Greek and Hebrew say not to rely on these tools and don't just call that up all the time, but learn it and go to the book and memorize it. And that's great for somebody who really is into, the Greek text of the New Testament and things like that. But for, everyday Joe who just wants to deepen his knowledge of the word, looking up a lexical form is not a bad thing. I would encourage that.
I think the biggest suggestion, so there's an old, you've probably heard the old saying, a little Greek is a dangerous thing. And I really like Bill Mounce kind of turned that around a little bit. And I think, and I can't remember how he worded this exactly, but basically it's not the little Greek that's the problem. It's the ego that's the problem.
That's right.
So if whatever you do, and even as someone who's now reading from the Greek New Testament, I try to mix in a lot of humility with it. Because if I discover something in the original language and I find out that nobody else on the planet has ever seen this before, I'm 99.9% sure
That's right.
I'm probably
wrong.
Probably wrong, right? If the greatest scholars in the world and the history of Christianity have studied this and nobody on the planet has ever seen it before, I think you have to mix a good dose of humility. But there's good resources that can sort of help with that. Bill Mounce did write that book. I think it's called Greek for the Rest of Us.
Yes. Yeah.
And I found that book good, and also sort of helps you not to make some of the fallacies that you can make with, word studies. There's word study fallacies. There's exegetical fallacies. So I think getting a book like that and then mixing in a lot of humility is the key to accessing the language.
Right. Definitely. So now when we're talking about Greek Bibles, right, typically today we see a number of translations that are translated from what we would call the Negligible text or UBS 5. They're the same text, but apparatus is slightly different. Now, there's a distinction to be made between the Negligible text and then something like what the King James has been translated with, which we would call the Textus Receptus. There's some minor differences between the two. Can you kind of enlighten for us like the nature of these differences and the variance between the two? What does that mean for us?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's one that I've thought about quite a bit. I started this, so as I mentioned earlier, my favorite translation is the King James Version, and almost every time you say that, you had to almost qualify that. I'm
not a King James Version onlyist.
Yeah, I'm not one that says that. If you use some other translation or anything, and I refer to other translations. So I think it's the autographs. And by autographs, I mean the original inspired documents. That's what's inspired. That's what's inerrant, on my view. So I don't claim inerrancy for any English translation, but I don't go around criticizing a lot of English translations either. So I started all this when I read Dr. James White's book when I was a teenager on the King James only controversy.
Yeah.
And it kind of explored the differences between, the critical text, what you're calling the Negligible or the UBS, which is called also the critical text, and the Byzantine text, or the Textus Receptus. So I've really spent a lot of time trying to compare the differences. Most of the differences, the vast majority of the differences, hardly anybody would really even care about. There's this vast bulk, I can't put a number on it, but this vast bulk of differences that aren't even translatable. So you can't even get it into translation how minor some of the differences are. But then there's this other group of differences which are more significant and will affect the meaning of the verse.
Right.
And then I would say there's a third group of differences which would actually, I think, have some sort of doctrinal implication. And I'm not saying that it would change you from one denomination to another denomination or totally change your fundamentals of your beliefs, but they will make you wrestle with a doctrine in a way. For example, John 1:18, the Textus Receptus, the Byzantine text, they read only begotten Son.
Right.
Whereas the Nestle-Aland text or the UBS text would read, depending on how you would translate this, but only begotten God or only unique God or something like that. Whereas the Byzantine text has Son, the critical text has God. So that's a fairly significant, difference.
Yeah, and I think for those kinds of differences, like, they would be very significant if it wasn't for the fact that other passages of Scripture tend to clarify these doctrines out anyway. So whether that passage in John 1:18 is referring to Christ's sonship, or whether it's referring to Christ's deity, it's clearly attested to in the Scriptures that Christ is the Son of God and he is also God. So I suppose in the immediate context, those seem significant, but then when you break it out into the further context, it just sort of melts away into the undergirding of the theology of the New Testament.
Very few people would base their whole belief on, say, the Godhead on one passage.
One verse, right?
One verse, right?
Yeah.
What you believe about Jesus and his relationship to the Father, and it doesn't just rest on one passage. I think I would agree that these passages that are doctrinally significant, they don't impact doctrine in such a way that, like I said, that you're going to totally change all your beliefs or anything like that. But I do think they're going to make you wrestle with the text in a different way. And for me, the reason why it's important, for some people it's not going to be important at all, but for me, the reason why it's important is because we believe these are the words that have been breathed out by God.
Right.
So we want to get them right. And that's really the whole purpose of reading or studying the original language is because we want to get to the very words that God gave.
Absolutely. 100%.